Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Different Strokes for Different Folks, to find common ground and take it to the next level with David Clarke here on Blog Talk Radio. Each week, the show will encourage you to keep an open mind and prepare to open the door to new understandings. We will have an exciting array of diverse guests who will point up the fact that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. Now your host, David Clarke.
Welcome to Different Strokes for Different Folks, where we will indeed be finding common ground and taking it to the max level. I'm your host, David Clarke. I'm a spiritual adventurer, and I suggest you become the same. When you keep an open mind, not only will you open the door to new understandings, but you will come to see that despite our seeming differences, we're all basically the same. This way you can see where you can find common ground so that you can relate rather than compare yourself to others. Now, I'm very excited tonight. I'm welcoming back An, who is a Magi walk-in from the multiverse. And what happened is she stepped into this human existence to relieve another soul who we've had on the show. That his person was named Jessie An Nichols George, and An now inhabits her body. An is still known by Jessie's name, though she calls herself by An. Jessie and An are part of the same Magi team, which work to assist people in living compassionately, wisely, and harmoniously. Their work helps people to be conscious of their wholeness and how they are existing. Together, Jessie and An have created 7 books on their own. Jessie was a collaborator on the bestseller book Embraced by the Divine, and she hosted her own international radio show, The Code Connection, for 5 years. She also created the Genesis Clearing Statement. An focuses on carrying out the Code Journey work by producing a new edition of a book by that title each year to guide people in how to maneuver life on Earth. Now, as a coding interpreter, she helps people understand the flow of their energy in this world and how to bring that into divine alignment. Her work uses almost 39 years of experience teaching and working with clients, as well as blending Eastern and Western philosophies through over 50 different modalities. An's human self is a 13-plus generation spiritual healer, energy tuner, spiritual and wellness coach. She is also a 13th generation Druidic practitioner, honoring and appreciating the harmony of all things and working with the natural cycles of life. This bloodline history includes everything from freedom fighters like George Washington, a lead translator and Hebrew scholar involved in the original translations of the Bible, a 4-star general in the Air Force, royalty, Apache and Cherokee Indian, European farming, many of the Celtic and Northern European influences, as well as a bit of Norse energy. As a Magi, An works with all star seeds, soul groupings, and existences. And so let me welcome An. An, once again, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, David, and thank you so much for having me back here and continuing with this saga of the codes and what they're all about and sharing in this journey.
Well, thank you for joining us. And just to let the callers and listeners know, this is part 2 of a 3-part interview with An, and you can listen to the podcast of the first interview, which I believe was 2 weeks ago. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. We did. Yes, it was 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago. I had to stop and think there for a minute, but.
Right, I did too. I didn't have it in front of me.
Quite a while for some reason.
Yeah.
Or
well,
no, it was 3 weeks ago. It was 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. Okay. Well, that is longer, isn't it? Well, we won't have to wait as long for the next one. That's going to be next week. So please tune in again next week. At any rate, this is a fascinating journey that you are on, and I'm wondering if you could just briefly tell what it was that caused you to step in as a walk into Jessie's life.
Well, definitely. There were a lot of things, and really the code journey work had to be carried on, and that couldn't take just any walk-in to do it, because it is kind of really specific to our language and our Magi team. So that would be like, throwing somebody from America who didn't speak anything but English into, Zimbabwe or, some other remote country, and they didn't speak the language or anything. It's you've got to have a certain knowledge base with it. And so in this journey of stepping in, Jessie had some very unusual circumstances, very different circumstances than normal, and she was under attack, spiritual attack by her sister, and there was great risk for her to remain in this body. And I definitely encourage people to go back to the interview 3 weeks ago to get fully filled in on this and all of the lead up to this aspect and what I was stepping into. But I did have the blessing of being with Jessie for a couple of months before she departed, and we knew that there would be high risk if we didn't get her out prior to her sister's passing. So in that process, I had to enter in. I basically had to learn the way everything was functioning. I'd been watching as a Magi. That's part of what we do. We watch and we observe and things like that. But it's still different once you actually enter in and merge into the third dimensional world and the third dimensional plane for that. And so I had a lot to learn in a very short period of time, but at least I feel very, very grateful that I had that time to come in and be with her, and then to be a part of helping her to transition out and return. And really what we're going to talk about tonight, David, with the code journey work, has a lot to do with things that led up to me coming into being a walk-in, because it really is this epic love story that happened among Jessie and Orly, and I'm excited to get into what some of that story is about. And their love didn't happen just on this plane. It happened in many existences, and it has an effect on what happens in many, many existences. So very, very powerful. And that's kind of a brief summary of what brought me here.
Thank you, and we will certainly delve into that relationship. I just wanted to ask you one more question with regards to your introduction, and that is if you could explain to the listeners what the Magi, what their role is in all creativity in the universe is.
Yes, well, the Magi, they're really a very compassionate group, and we deal a lot with making decisions based on what people choose. So we don't decide things for people, but we do try to guide them towards a more compassionate lifestyle. We try to keep people from going into just a total self-destruction, if you want to say that. Sometimes that is part of the natural process, but we oversee what's happening, and we pay attention to what is happening in all the different existences throughout the multiverse. And when we need to, we step in. If we need to do that, which we can do it through an incarnation, but usually we do it through a mindset, through lending inspiration, through creating guidance, through releasing insight about things. And so that is a big part of what we do, is try to help people stay connected to their soul self when they're in different existences, try to keep collective existences kind of on track, if you want to say that, where, like a dimension like the third dimension, it's very easy for things to get distorted and distracted and people to lose sight or connection with the soul self and to get too absorbed into the existence that they're in. So, that's a big part of it. We have to really watch things, and we try to keep things in balance and not let any major force get out of hand.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Let us delve into some of Jessie's life and some of her life's work. She is a woman that had a tremendous gift and came down through many generations of spiritual healers. So she was in kind of a unique position as far as most people go. Can you tell us a little bit about Jessie's story? And, of course, I know you want to focus on her relationship with Orly and how that all played into what later transpired for Jessie.
It was very interesting with Jessie. She was a very kind, very compassionate soul. I think like a lot of people in this dimension, and this dimension can be very good about twisting and turning things around so that they appear differently than they are. And the codes are really something that came into her later in life, but all through life she tried to really honor a lot of her heritage through understanding the universe, through understanding the land, through understanding nature. And nature was something she couldn't get enough of, if that was the beach under a full moon, or if that was camping in the forest, or if that was hiking on a trail someplace. I mean, that's where she felt at peace and at home. And she had an uncanny gift for intuition and receiving visions, receiving insight about things before they would happen. And fortunately, she always honored that gift. She always chose to work with it in as much of a conscious and loving way as she could at any point. I mean, obviously, when you come into a human existence, you're having to unfold a lot of things because of the programming that we have on this earth and the technology that we've had for the last several decades. And so she really stayed with it. Like, that was what felt real to her, whether that was prayer work over a candle or prayer work on a creek or anything like that. The simplest of things for her were full of magic. They were full of life and full of inspiration. And so she was very interesting. She had this way of inspiring people. She had a way of connecting with people, even though a good portion of her life she had been outcast, manipulated, taken advantage of along the way. She never chose to reside in that victim space, no matter what happened to her. So I think that's very interesting. And the code journey work actually then started to come in after she had had a lot of life-changing experiences along the way, being told by doctors there was no medical reason for her to be alive, various things like that. And she had at one point finally moved up to Utah and had been there for a few years. She was trying to be close to her mom in the older years, and that unfolded a lot of family drama and a lot of things that she became awakened to during that time and had to come face to face to with things like manipulation in her family and really understanding different things. And it's not that her mother necessarily intentionally was looking to hurt her or that type of thing, but I think it was a pattern that was created. And so for her, she had a point where she had to make some very, very tough choices towards the end of her time in Utah. And that's kind of where the code journey starts, is at that point where she had to make those tough choices.
Well, I'd like to talk about the codes, and you tell me what you'd prefer. Would you like to talk about them at this point, or would you like to talk about her, excuse me, her relationship with Orly first?
You know, let's talk.
They're very intertwined, aren't they?
Yeah, they're kind of intertwined, really. But I think maybe talking about the relationship first might people a little bit.
Okay, let's do that.
When she first met Orly, now Jessie had developed a wide background in a lot of practices and studies, and she had versed herself in literally over 50 different practices, belief systems, cultures, things like that, spiritual tools. And she was working with a lot of different things, and she was kind of on this edge of integrating a lot of things and looking at patterns and looking at different pieces and how they were reacting to each other. But the codes hadn't really unfolded when she met Orly. And at the point that she connected with Orly, she was being forced out of where she was living by family, which was a plan created by her sister. And her sister and her mother had really hoped that she would just be forced to move in with them, take care of them, all kinds of things like that were really entered into some seriously negative energy. And at that point, she already could not spend much time in their home because she would just get physically sick, really physically sick. And it would take her half a day to recover from that after like 15 minutes in the home. So she was looking at moving out of this very nice home into a 20 square foot, 24 square foot vehicle, basically a 4 by 6 foot space, and going on the road. And she was out doing some prayer work, which she regularly did on the local creek in southern Utah. And while she was out there, she came across Orly. And Orly came in to this existence to connect with her specifically to get her the codes and to help her remember more of who she was, the fact that she did come from this Magi team, to remember our language, to give her a gift to help get her through. And Orly had been in and out at different points, but, really was worried about her at that point. And we were all on edge by that decision of Orly to come in. And so Orly entered in through a cat body, which was at the point of entry starving to death, had the eyes all crusted over and just really, really not in good condition. The weather was very hot, and she didn't even recognize it was a cat at first, but they proceeded to have an incredible conversation on the creek in the spot. And once Jessie realized it was indeed a cat and what was going on, she was very, very startled because it was right at the edge of a waterfall on this creek. And so she kind of talked the cat back and tried to keep from startling it, and it just sat there trying to, let her make the decision if she was going to take it or not. And she really felt like and knew within her that that decision was a make or break point in her life. It was a do or die point. And she really struggled, in some ways. She, her heart was saying yes, 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 but her logical mind is saying, what are you going to do with a cat when you hit the road and you have no place to live but your vehicle and things like this? So this whole story, actually the complete story, is in the Code Journey. So they ended up traveling. They ended up touring around the United States. They had made 1.5 trips around the entire U.S. They would be out. They would do full day hikes together. They would be all through all different towns and walk different places together. And so they built this relationship. And through that time, Orly was giving her responses, giving her different reactions, giving her different pieces and memories, if you want to say that in a way. So there was this sort of teaching that was going on, the sharing that was going on during their journeys. And, Jessie just loved that time. And people that met them, they could just see the connection between them. And people would say, yeah, we all love our pets and there's that love there. But the people that knew them and got to meet them face to face could see this connection unlike anything that they had ever seen. They could just see how enormous the love was and how strong it was, and just the way that they would look at each other was so incredibly powerful. The bond was so incredibly powerful, and it's no wonder because, they really are, meant to be this one soul. They really are, each other in that essence. And it was as the end came around for Orly that things became really hard for Jessie. I mean, she was heartbroken, at the thought that Orly wasn't going to be there anymore. And she had really realized everything that Orly went through to show Jessie that true love, to show her what real love was, and that indeed it existed, and it wasn't just some dream out there. It wasn't just some vision in her head or imaginary thing. And when Orly passed, that's when Jessie really started unlocking the codes. That's when she really started to realize in that reflection that their whole journey had been the sharing experience, and that Orly was teaching her about the codes and reminding her about them, which is this language that we share as the Magi, during the whole travels, during all of the journeys, during all of the experiences they had. And she would reflect back and think about where Orly was comfortable and where Orly wasn't comfortable, and she would start to unfold that information, and she started remembering and making the connections through that. So I'm going to stop there for a minute in case you have a question or you think somebody might have a question from that.
Well, it just sounds like an incredible love story, and as you were talking in the beginning, I was thinking, oh, when is she going to tell us that Orly is a cat? And then I realized, that's the whole point of it. Orly was much more than a cat, just happened to be a soul that incarnated in a cat's body. And it's an amazing story. I really enjoy listening to you tell it again. And I'm wondering if, and pardon me if I missed this piece, I had to take care of something. What role did Orly play in terms of helping Jessie with the codes? Did you explain that yet?
Well, the role that Orly played in that process was to get the memory of the codes back into Jessie's consciousness, into her human mind where it could be used. Orly knew the danger she was going to be in. Orly knew the dangers that she was going to have to face. And without the code wisdom, I'm not sure that Jessie would have made it, honestly, in many ways, because she went through things that just seemed to defy a lot of logic and a lot of reason in her experiences. And Orly knew if there was any way that she would have any chance, that Jessie would have any chance at making it through this life, that code information was going to be absolutely critical for her to get. And so they had this way of communicating telepathically, energetically, through the heart center, and that connection, I mean, they would speak just as almost like you and I were speaking, even if there weren't actual words being said. And their conversation was just so conversational and in many ways. So Jessie actually would ask Orly questions, you know, am I on the right track? Am I doing the right thing? And, you know, of course, being in a cat body, there's only so much you can respond. You know, your communications are far more challenging, you know, between species, so to say. But they found their ways, and they had it. And it just was, you know, from there. So really that was, I think, the key part to Orly coming in was this information had to get through to her. It had to be there if she was going to have any chance in this world. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what the codes are. And I think that would be very helpful because we've been talking about them. And most of the listeners probably don't have a clue. So the codes, David, really are, like I said, they're a language. They're a system of wisdom and understanding that integrates many different modalities, none of which are used in the traditional ways that they're used on Earth. So, you know, they might incorporate, for example, looking at the new moon, like we have a new moon today, or looking at the full moon, or looking at, you know, what sign the sun is in, or season, or whatever. But we use words and numbers and names and addresses and different things to be a launching pad for this language. And the codes are really this language that we use among the Magi to understand the truth of things. So they're non-partial. They let us really get a glimpse at what is happening in its true patterns, in its true wisdom that it has to share with us. And so, like when I work with the codes, I go in and I might take that address or that name and I will translate it into my own language, into the code language, and then bring that back out and use that to explain that wisdom to other people. Now, Jessie realized the magnitude of these codes and realized that, you know, this isn't really something you can just put up on a web page for people to play with and to toy with as fun and games. She realized all of the variances, and she tried very hard to figure out a way to share these with the rest of the world, because she realized in her own experiences what an incredibly powerful tool this was for humanity and how important this was going to be to humanity to have this wisdom accessible to them. And that is why she created the Code Journey book, because she felt like that was
a way that would reach people and would be accessible to them regardless of perhaps their belief system or their practices. It would be something they could work with on a day-to-day basis that would be easy to access. So the codes are really about getting to this true energetic pattern. It's about understanding the true essence or the true core of something, whether that is, a tree, or whether that is an address, the energy of a place, or whether that's a person. And so they literally have this limitless potential to them. And when I work with the codes and when I utilize them to share universal wisdom with people that they can use in their day-to-day life, I'm not predicting anything. So I want that to be clear. This isn't a prediction tool by any means, but I'm interpreting and looking at what the different energy currents are for a particular situation or a particular relationship or a particular interaction between a person and a place or something else, and seeing how those energies will interact with each other. Then through that understanding, I can tell whether that is going to be harmonious or favorable or whether there's going to be challenges in it. People think sometimes, oh, you predicted this because you wrote it a year before it ever happened, or you picked the Super Bowl winner against all odds or things like that. And it's really not a prediction. It's really about understanding the currents and realizing how those different currents are interacting. So if we look at this, you take an example that if you're in a lab, for example, or even in your kitchen on your stove, and you go to cook things together, you have certain things, certain flavors that will go really well together. And okay, if I put this type of food with this type of food, that's going to pair really well together, and that the flavors are going to play off of each other and going to create a really good meal. But if I take one of those same foods and I put it with something different, it's not going to do well together. It's not going to have a good flavor or a good taste to it, and it's not going to be a pleasant eating experience. If we look at it from a more chemistry aspect, you can take something and when you add one ingredient, it makes it more powerful. When you add another ingredient, then it makes it less powerful or reduces its strength to it. So, on a physical level, if we look at the human body, for example, if we were to put proteins and greens in our body, we know that our body's going to get stronger. If we put a lot of refined sugars and processed foods in it, our physical body's going to get weaker. So the codes really kind of work on a very similar principle to that, and it's just about understanding what's mixing together. So in essence, no particular code is necessarily good, bad, right, or wrong. It's about how it's interacting, and this is why we can see some people, and it's almost as unique, as an individual DNA or an individual thumbprint or fingerprint in many ways, because you can look at it and take the same item, and with one person, it's absolutely wonderful and they do great, and with another person, that very same item doesn't work at all for them. You can take, when I look at things from the weather, or I look at different phenomenon that happens in the world, and when the new moon happens on a certain day, if I really want to break it down into bigger detail, that new moon's going to have a different influence in Denmark than it's going to have in the United States, because the codes of those countries are different. And even within the United States, the new moon energy will have a different way that it presents itself here in Maine versus the way it presents itself in California. So all these very subtle things can play into it when we start looking at the codes. But I love the limitless factor, and I love that it will show me the truth in anything, and that's been really, really valuable lately when looking at world events and news and and trying to figure out, what's going to flow for me, and so I'll stop there.
And we should say, yeah, I was just going to say that for people that are interested in continuing with this exploration that I'm having with Ann, next week she is going to be talking about how the codes affect current events. And so that's one of the main thrusts of next week's show. I know that in the beginning, it took me a while to understand exactly what was meant by codes. Now, you have talked about a few things like names and places. What are some of the other things that are taken a look at when one is analyzing the codes, when you're analyzing the codes?
So, certainly again, we want to look at different pieces. I can literally look at anything. Everything has its own vibrational current. And what's very interesting with the codes is that, for example, in astrology, if you look at everybody who's born on a certain day, technically by astrology they should all be the same, right? They're all born under the same sign, the same influences. If you have 10 babies born in the same hospital on the same day, they should all be the same by astrology standards. But they're not. Those people are all different. Well, they're all different because they don't all share the same name. They, don't all live in exactly the same town or exactly at the same address. So even if they're born at the same hospital, once their name is brought into the picture, everything starts to shift and shape. Now, that doesn't mean that environment doesn't have an influence on things, because it does as well. Certainly we still want to pay attention to environmental factors, and we know that whether somebody grows up in a loving home or doesn't grow up in a loving home can influence how they turn out. But more than that, that's going to have an even bigger influence, because you could take that same thing and say, why if I take 10 people from abused families, one of them or two or three of them turn out okay, and then 4 or 5 of them are in the middle and they don't necessarily excel, but they're not having major issues, and then you have those 2 or 3 that just follow the total criminal life. Well, how can that be? So with codes, it's really like getting down to that individual imprint to that person. So this is why when we move, or when people get married, if the woman changes her name, literally it changes her vibration or her code pattern. And even though she will continue to carry, for example, the birth name, and this is true of whether it's a woman or anybody else that changes their name along the way, even if she changes her name and picks up a new energy pattern, she's still going to have some of that birth energy to deal with. That person will still have their birth energy to deal with. So each letter, each number, each piece of something tells me a story. It has a whole story behind it. It has a whole realm of information behind it. And so as I bring those pieces together, I can, for example, look at the codes of 2 people, and I can know whether their relationship will work out. Or some people that I know, they've gone ahead and I've helped them with some name changes, or I've helped them with understanding the dynamics that they're dealing with. and the relationships. Now, the codes are not going to tell somebody what to do. They're not going to tell you, you need to go do this. But they're going to tell you what maybe a different choice will look like, what will happen if you go to work for a certain company. It doesn't mean that the company's bad or good, but what's your experience going to be with that company? If you get into a relationship, I can pretty much tell whether that relationship is going to be full of challenges or whether that relationship is going to be very strong. So, and many times there can be different components depending on the path somebody chooses to take in life, the choices that they're making. Those can influence things. And I've had couples, they've chosen some very tough code patterns to be on, and yet the fact that they understand what they're dealing with has made a big difference for them. It's shifted the way that they move through life. They understand that if they are on code patterns of danger, that adventure activities is not what they should be doing. Their life might be highly transformational. Their life might have a great connection to it between the two of them, but their connection might also be on death patterns, and then people around them might start dying, for example. So there's so many little components, and then again that can shift based on the address, based on the identification numbers of a land, like a parcel number. Those can influence things. I've seen for myself all kinds of different experiences. Since I've been here, I've watched Jessie go through different experiences based on where she is. And what can happen is when we're under favorable influences with the codes and we're in a strong, favorable code flow for ourselves, then it's easier to deal with the challenges that come up. Life in this world is never going to be 100% void of challenges unless you just happen to be born into the most amazing, influences and happen to have just found your perfect alignment in the spot of the world. And, I haven't seen that with anybody. I think everybody on the face of this earth has some challenges at one point or another. And we see that in the personal years that people go through. 1 year is full of challenges, and then another year might be fairly peaceful, and another year might be pretty prosperous. So, we're all going through most of the main code cycles or patterns that exist as long as we're here. So it's just so limitless, it's so limitless. So it's all about the interactions. It's all about the exchange of energy that's happening. And I know the place that I came into, when I came into Jessie's body, there were some things that were favorable about it, environmentally, physically. There were a lot of favorable influences, very nice person I was staying with, good things from that aspect. But I also had some depth code patterns. And when I would have to drive to work on a daily basis or things like that, I oftentimes had semi-trucks coming over the road at me. I moved literally across the street, and my code patterns changed, and I didn't have the death patterns anymore. But
thank God.
Patterns, right, thank God. But then I had patterns that dealt with, for example, health and financial challenges. Well, the interesting piece of that is that after I moved in here, my body just put on a whole lot of weight. And I am now starting to get that weight off because I have the relationship and the way I'm working with my body. But as of the end of January, I had to leave the job that I was at because of health issues, because I was having problems to the point that it was running me down a path that I wasn't going to be able to walk. I have fantastic landlords here, really nice people around me. It's a great space. If you look at everything on paper, it's absolutely great. But even though I've got a lot of very, very favorable code patterns, I do have those challenging ones. And, you know, in time, I see myself moving out of here and moving into something even more favorable than that. So having that wisdom, having that knowledge, I think makes a big difference. You know, David, if somebody came to you and they just started yelling at you and they were angry at you and you didn't understand why, there's a tendency to react to that. There's a tendency to get wrapped up in that drama. But if you understand why, you understand that they're in a lot of pain, you understand suffering that they've been through, you understand what's behind that anger, and maybe you realize it's not even attached to you in any way, shape, or form, it changes your reaction. It changes how you approach that person. And the codes are the same way.
I like that analogy very much. Thank you so much for providing so much illumination around the codes. We do have a client who's become a friend of Ann's, who's with us in the studio tonight, and she is willing to talk a little bit about her experience. And so I'm going to bring her on the line if that sounds okay with you, Ann.
It sounds wonderful. And I should say, and I'll let Jackie speak for herself, but I'm so grateful that Jackie could make it tonight because she has a very, very full day tomorrow. And she is doing some amazing work in this world with photon light therapy. And Jackie came to me through a mutual acquaintance, not quite a year and a half ago, I don't think. So I'll let her take it from there.
Okay. Jessie, you're live. How are you? I mean, Jackie.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm botching up names tonight. You know, it's funny. I'll just briefly tell you this funny story. I had your phone number and Ann's phone number written down in my book, and I didn't identify whose was whose. And so Ann called in, and I thought it was you. And I said, "Hello, Jackie." And she said, "This is Ann." Or "I'm on." That's what she said, "I'm on." And I thought she was saying, "I'm on the show." And I said, "Yes, you are on the show." Nice to have you here, Jackie. "No, I'm on." And then I finally got it. It was just very comical. So, at any rate, Jackie, you've known Ann for a brief period of time now, and I wonder if you could tell us how you came to be acquainted with her and what that association's been like for you.
Yes, well, thank you, David, so much, and Ann, for inviting me on tonight. I'm just so full of joy to be here and to be able to talk about my experience, and hopefully it will resonate with your listeners. But it was a year ago, this past February, that I met Ann through a mutual friend. And I have two really good examples to share with both of you tonight. Both of you have heard these stories before, but I think they'd be great for your listeners. Since I am a new follower or new to the codes, only a year and a half, my first experience when I met Ann was my husband and I were looking at a property to buy. And we were just so sure that we were going to buy this property. I mean, it was like no other property mattered. We were going to buy this house. I had envisioned my future there. It was, it was going to be a go. And at the time, I wasn't very involved with Ann or very close to her, but with our mutual friend at the time. And my mutual friend actually said, "Well, why don't you ask Ann to run the codes on the address of the property and see where it falls for you?" And I thought, "Oh, okay." And so I did, and she said to me, "Yeah, no, that's no, absolutely not. There's danger for you and your husband if you buy that property. The codes are not favorable." And it was pretty severe. And I was like shocked, like, what? It is so interesting, my work with the codes, because, I will illuminate a little bit about our human and our soul self, and how that's drastically changed for me. And back then I was just really like, what do you mean it's not coded? Like, I have to have this house. And so she said to me, give me the address where you're presently living now. And I said, okay, here it is. Well, what blew my mind is, like most humans, we have a problem with our faith. We have a problem with believing in things that we cannot see, touch, taste, hear. And she read the codes of the address that I've been here almost 10 years, 9+ years. And she said to me about the codes of the land. And only I knew these things as the support of the land, or certain experiences that I had experienced energetically. Only I knew that. And here, when I gave on the address and she was reading back to me only things I knew, or that the land knew, I said, wow. Because at that point in the very beginning, I was a little skeptical of the codes. I didn't know what the codes were. Just had this mutual friend said, you've got to get this book, and this is my friend who wrote the book. And I was like, well, what are the codes, So my first introduction to the energetics of the codes and the non-favorable and the favorable and what they meant was just something as simple as having on guide me with this property that my husband and I we were just so sure we were going to buy. And then for her to tell me what the energy was on this land that I had been living for a very long time. So that was a real eye-opener for me. I thought, oh, wow. So at that point, I purchased the book, and I was reading the daily codes. And you read them when you're first introduced to them, and you take them in. And somebody like me, I like to learn something right away. I like to have it click right away. And it took some time. I just had to read them, and what did they speak to me? What did it mean for me? And as I was getting through closer to spring, my birthday falls in June. And Ann had said, if you're interested, I would love to do your own personal codes for your birth year, which runs every year from your birthday of, like, for example, my birthday in June for 2020 will now run from June of 2020 to June of 2021. So now we're going back a year. So we're going back from June of 2019 to June of 2020. And I said, sure. I gave her the cost of what she charges for that. And she emailed me about 15 pages, because you have to remember it's the codes for each month. And this is based on my personal name and based on who I am in my soul according to the codes. So the next piece that's very interesting is that I had wanted to move, going back to this other property. My husband and I, we were on this mission of, we're moving off this property. We're going to move somewhere. We're going to move. And it was really important, And when I read my codes in the very beginning, and this will stick with me the rest of my life, it was, Jackie, this is the year that your human and your soul are going to connect and reunite. And I read that, and I was like, okay, not sure what that means, but, I'll go with it. And I'm reading down, because she'll always give a small synopsis of your overall codes of the year, and then you get specific with each month. And in there, all I'm looking for is that I'm going to be moving, and I'm moving soon, and I'm going to get. I just had such a tunnel vision about this move, and it actually said that this was not going to be the year. 2019 to 2020 was not going to be the year for the big move, the big moves in my life. Well, I got to tell you, we can laugh about this now, but that night when I read that, she's giggling because I know the night I read that, nothing else mattered but that. And I literally then got the message of what is the difference between the ego in the human and our soul. Because I really needed to just put that piece of me in time out and say, really? Are you going to really just ruin the rest of your night? Are you going to ruin the rest of your year because you're not moving this year? It just is amazing how I was very stubborn. I was very headstrong. I want what I want now. And I have to tell you, through the year, the lessons and the experiences that God had to put in front of me through the codes for me to learn, there would have been a total disaster if I would have taken things in my own hands and tried to move before my time was ready. And everything that was talked about in my personal codes, everything within, I don't know how to explain it, but I can tell you that there were things I could look back on and say the energy of that month or the energy of that week or whatever it was for me, I had experiences that were profound. And I could look back and say, now I clearly understand what she meant, what the codes meant for me at that time.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It sounds like it's been quite a journey for you as far as the codes go and how they have related to the desires that you've had in your life and what they've meant in terms of recreating those desires. So I thank you again for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go back to on?
I could be here all night talking about this, but I won't say. I'll let you get back to on. I will say for your listeners that two things that I just really want to put out there, and that is definitely get yourself a copy of the book. Be patient with yourself. Give it time. The codes will speak to you. You will start to have a closer relationship with your soul, with the divine, with God. It's beautiful. It's changed my life. It's changed who, I don't want to say it's changed who I am. I think the person who I resonate now was always there. It's just that I see with a new pair of eyes. I see through the soul self, if anybody can understand that, not so much my human self anymore, but through my soul self. And that's profound. And the other thing I would say is if you are interested in ever having your own personal code work done, I would highly recommend it.
I would do the same thing. I had my code work done, and it was an amazing thing. That was several years ago. Jessie did it for me, and it was 25 or 30 pages long. It was incredible. Let's point out that the website for Jessie on Nichols George, or on, I should say, is CompassionCodes.com. Of course, she is still known by Jessie's name, at least at the present. And where is, let me refer this question to you, where is the best place for people to get a hold of your book?
Actually, going through my website is the best way to go, and there is a tab on there for the products and books that I have, that I've written, and you'll see, within that tab, the code journey. And that book there's a new book that's put out every year. My goal is always to try to put it out in the fall. Now, I'll admit there's definitely typos in the one for this year because I did not get the proofreading done on it that I wanted to do. It was pretty much put it out or don't put it out, and it got put out very, very late. So, anybody picking up the 2020 book, be careful with, just be forgiving of the typos that are in there. And then I'm hoping in the fall, earlier in the fall, to get the 2021 book out. And really, this is a powerful book. We're not talking a small book. We're talking a book that's like 700 pages that I put out every year because the influences for every day change every year. How they're interacting, the different influences interact at a given time change throughout the year. And, David, one of the things I love about the book, again, because it's so accessible to wherever somebody is at on their journey, whether they are just starting out on their journey, whether they've been on their journey for a long time. The codes seem to open up the insights for people, person in their own way to a certain extent. And that's a really powerful piece. You know, they have this way of customizing to each individual, and you start to learn when certain terms are referred to or certain aspects in the book are mentioned, how that's going to play out for you in your life, which is, I think, very, very exciting that they have the ability to do that they have that kind of fluctuation in there. In addition, I am also running study groups, and I've been trying to maintain that at 2 a month, usually around the full moon and the new moon. And I do post some of the insights, like new moon type insights, full moon type insights, and those get posted on my social media pages. So if anybody wants to check out what that information is like, it's there. And it's really just this great, like I said, handbook. It's this great personal journey. And each person is on their own journey, which is really cool. They might all be working with the same information, but they're all doing their own journey at the same time. And it's so exciting. It's so exciting to hear the different experiences, the different ways that it changes and it transforms them. But the thing about the codes, because they are the truth in things, is that it literally does a sort of reprogramming on our brain to help us reconnect with our self, to help us reconnect with the essence of who we really are, and to help us flow through a world that can be incredibly challenging. And I love that Jackie shared her different experiences of what it was like for her coming in, because I remember when I did that first personal year report, and I don't always do them at any time. I mean, if somebody contacts me and it's an unusual situation, I might try to really make the time right then. Sometimes I'll just open up certain periods that I will do them, because I can only do so many personal year charts, a year, just based on time, because they're time consuming for me to do. They take about 8 to 10 hours for me to do one report. And but I remember when I gave her the first one, and she was in tears. She didn't want to talk to me initially. I think it had to really set in there, and she was, her human self was having these temper tantrums going on, and it was like, but this is what happens sometimes with the codes. And like in Jackie's situation, one of the pieces on the land that she's at, for example, had to do with health challenges, physical challenges, financial challenges, and for her personally. And she said, but I have this resonation with the land. Like, I feel it, it's in my soul. I just, I feel this whole spiritual process. And this actually isn't uncommon, because a lot of times there are codes that might nourish our soul, but they're not good for us on a physical level. So to be in that permanently, like that can be great energy maybe for a retreat where you're going to disconnect and, not deal with anybody for a couple of days. But when you live in that permanently, and I've watched Jackie through the year, she's had some physical issues. She had to get help with her horses for a while because her body wasn't holding up. And these are the things we don't account for. But there are code flows that we can get on that just really open up the abundance. And I remember we started looking for property for her outside of the area where she is, and I honed in on a couple of towns, and she was just like, no. And she's just like, I don't want to live out in the middle of nowhere. I don't want to, but that's so far from the city and stuff. And I said to her, Jackie, just go out there, take a weekend, go out there and see what the energy is like for you. And she came back from that weekend and she was like, you have no idea what it was like. I never had people be that nice to me in my life. I've never had people that just cared about me and just opened up and were so willing to help me out. And I said, that is code alignment. And so it was really exciting for her, you know, for me as well, to watch her get this experience of what it was like to be in alignment versus what it's like to not be in alignment. And then as time went on, of course, and we're trying to find property for her, and she would send me these addresses, and it'd be like, nope, 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 nope. And she would just have her days of being in tears and breaking down and all of this stuff. And then one day I come back and I said, this could work. Yeah, this is okay for different things. So we've kind of worked out these options, and that's where the study sessions come in so handy, because it, you know, I can write a 700-page book and I'm still not going to be able to cover everything that can happen within the code patterns. So that's the time to open up and where we come together as a group and we share those experiences that are happening, and I can make some of those other connections based on what people are having happen in their life. And so now, of course, she's very excited, and this piece of property that, you know, a little over a year ago, she wasn't going to forfeit for anything. she can't practically wait to get off of it now. So, you know, it's fun. You know, it's fun, and she's just been, you know, she's great because she's so proactive, and I think that's true with anything. Even if you have the best information in the world, if you don't use it, it's not going to matter. But the cool thing with the codes is that truth piece. And, you know, that truth piece is just nothing short of divine essence. And because of that, people can feel that inside of them. They can feel that resonate all the way through them. And so they tend to listen. They tend to listen to it. And I have people that work with it, and they've tested it. I know one of the people in our group, and she said, you know, I just didn't quite believe it at first. And so I went out one day when you told me the weather was not good to be outside and I needed to stay near where I could get safety. And she said, lo and behold, if that storm didn't come out of nowhere, she goes, I don't ever go out now when you tell me not to go out.
Well, on that note, I think we should segue because we are going to be talking with one caller tonight, and for lack of a better word or description, you're going to give him a reading. Is that right,
Yeah, what we'll do is I'll see what he's looking to find out, and then I'll see what I need to work with from there.
Okay.
Depending on what he's asking, I can't give, you know, full 100% insight over the phone, but I can definitely
and
touch
this
on
is going to be brief.
Probably just touch on some core pieces that are certainly interplaying into things, and you know, at least maybe give a couple of key points for people. Okay.
Well, this is Ren, and he's the lucky caller of the evening. And hopefully the other callers will stay tuned and join us next week. Hi, Bren.
Oh, hey, David, and hi, Jessie Ann, right? Jessie Ann?
On.
On. Okay. So I have a specific question. I'm thinking of a move this year, possibly near the end of the year. And I'm going to give you the name of the town in Massachusetts. I live in New York City, but I'm looking at Barnstable, Massachusetts.
Barnstable, Barnstable.
BLE, yeah, Barnstable.
Okay. And, you know, now, just so people know, when I'm fully looking at something, I actually am like an address I actually will end up looking at the full address. I'll look at the parcel assessor's number. I look at zip codes. I look at counties. I look at cities and towns and the state itself in there. Now, is it Brian? Is that what I understood?
Yeah, Bryn, B-R-Y-N. Yeah.
B-R-Y-N. Okay, Bryn. And Bryn, do you mind sharing what your month and day of birth is?
Yeah, sure. It's July 3rd, 1956.
Okay. Okay. So you're definitely, in some ways, going to be coming into a good code pattern, a good shift here. It may not. I think you're going to find yourself in a lot more observation in this personal year coming forward. And I'm just kind of taking a look here at a couple of things. And actually, I can't fully grasp because I'm not, having full information to work with.
Yeah. Where
this town is going to be. But if we just look at the aspect of a move for you, this year is not necessarily all about change, but it will work for change for you. Mm-hmm. The thing that you want to pay attention to in doing this is to consider really observing something, really observing places. So if you're wanting to go to Barnstable, Massachusetts, you want to spend some time and just sit down, people watch, and really look at what's happening from that observer space. It's going to be very important during this year that you don't get yourself caught in a tug-of-war game between other people. And so you want to make sure you're holding very neutral space in things, a very objective space in things. And because what will happen is you've got this mutable quality that's going to be coming in this year, and so a lot of people will tend to just open up for you, and you may find that you get along with two different people, but those two different people don't get along with each other at all. So that's kind of coming into play. So you might have a lot of people opening up from some very deep personal stuff. But in this code pattern, it also does really favor success coming about. It does favor business coming about. It does favor the movement of product. And we can actually even translate that over if you're looking at a residential move, that is also the movement of things and people
so that's
and
this
places.
Year, right? You're talking about this year. Okay.
That would be starting with your birthday of this year. So
I see.
I would say that you definitely want to wait until at least your birthday before you make this kind of a shift. And I say that because where you're currently at, one, you're headed into the end part of your personal year right now, so your energy is a little bit lower. It needs to rest more. It needs to conserve on your energy more. Your health, you need to take a little bit better care of it between now and your birthday. And you're also at a point right now up until your birthday that your mind is in a really dreamy space. So it's not a good mindset for major contracts or thinking about things on a practical level. It's great for brainstorming. It's great, it's great for dreaming. It's great for intuition. It's great for getting signs and messages and that sort of thing. But it's not great for communications, and it's not great for signing contracts. So you just definitely want to hang on a little bit before you get too serious about that shift.
Oh, sure, yeah. I wasn't thinking like anything immediate. It's more like at the end of the year or something like that. Possibly. That's very interesting. It reminds me of numerology. Is this like numerology in a way?
Again, the codes use all different kinds of aspects to them. Numerology is definitely one of the tools that's blended into it, but it's not used in its traditional sense.
Yeah, interesting.
So it doesn't go by numerology guidelines.
I used to study numerology, and I know there's like a personal year, and then there's the cycles within a destiny year or whatever, or destiny lifetime or whatever. That's interesting. Yeah. Yep.
Wow. They have all their own things, and really, again, without having to get all of your information and to take the time to really run everything, it's going to be hard to see how some of that particular place would play out for you specifically.
Sure.
But definitely take the opportunity and do some people watching, some observing of the area, really watching the flow of the town.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I think that was a great guidance you just gave me about, going there just to observe the energy, the people, the interaction, the environment, the speed of the place, and see where it goes with me, right?
Well, and if we really attentively observe, and that's the really cool thing about that code pattern, is that we can get almost any piece of information that we need. If we're doing it in a very attentive and objective way, then everything can be seen to us.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. All right, thank you. Thank you for your insight. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very, very welcome.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard of walk-ins before, so it's very interesting, the walk-in situation. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care. Thanks, Dave.
Good night, Brent. God bless.
Good night.
You're
God
welcome.
Bless. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, that was very interesting, Ann, and thank you for honoring him with a brief reading. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we end for tonight?
Dad, I think with the codes, it's such a personal journey, and there's so many layers to it, which is part of what makes it exciting. And again, I can't stress that enough. And I think that people, as they pick it up, they find it very interesting where astrology leaves off, where numerology leaves off, where those things have a lot of, they could be very valuable, but they also categorize a lot. The codes become so personal. And the thing about working with the codes is, even though they're based on some, global influences of what's happening all around the world, or the currents all around the earth, is that we still are influenced by those. So even though we have our own personal cycles, we have our own personal things that are happening in our own lives with our own influences, we're still going to have to deal with those worldly influences. We're still going to have to deal with the worldly currents. And here again, it's that foresight, it's that knowledge that they offer us to act wisely, to use our power wisely, to hold us in alignment without telling us exactly what to do. And when you think about how powerful that is, you're still making your own choices, but at the same time, you realize, okay, I get it. The currents are about taking precautions today. The currents are about being responsible today. The currents are helping me realize that people may not be paying attention today. So I need to pay extra attention. I need to give extra time. These types of things become valuable to us, because then we can be in a position of acting instead of reacting. We can be in that position of being in flow instead of being caught off guard by it. And that's a pretty powerful thing to work with, I think, in life. I think it's just incredible when you get down to it.
It sounds amazing, when I think about it. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ann. I appreciate you being with us tonight. And thank you to the callers and listeners. And the show will be available as a podcast about 10 minutes after we close. So with that said, let's close. And you know what, folks? I just had a total blank. And so I'm going to wish you all good night and God bless. Good night, Ann. Thank you again.
Good night, David.